Hey guys, how's it going? Before I start, I'd actually like to make a couple of quick comments in regards to the future of my YouTube channel. Going forward, expect to see a little bit more Starcraft Brood War content. I'm doing this for the sake of myself to help myself learn the game a little bit better, as well as hopefully to anyone else who decides to learn the game, or hopefully if I actually manage to become pretty decent at doing this, help anybody who's interested in learning Brood War. I might not be very good myself as a StarCraft Brood War player. However, I find myself to be a very analytical person and find myself better understanding the game than I am at executing it. That being said, let's get started. The match you're watching in the background is Hero versus Jaehoon, which is a Zerg versus Protoss, Hero being the Zerg player and Jaehoon being the Protoss player respectively. The map is being played on Fighting Spirit and was uploaded by Starcraft Brood War FPVODs on August 12th. While it's not only because I'm a Zerg player, I'm going to be analyzing the Zerg player, Hero's, point of view. This is primarily because, 1, I couldn't find a replay for the game, and 2, it's the point of view that's being shown. So, with Fighting Spirit being a 4-player map, right away we see Hero doing something pretty interesting, which is moving his Overlord to his bridge, which is where a scouting probe will be coming from, rather than sending it immediately to where his enemy's potential spawns are. This is actually really important because if the Protoss player manages to scout the right expansion the first time, then Hero's going to be able to know his position right away without needing to scout himself. So coming up really soon, and by that I mean like right now, he's actually going to see a probe on the minimap. So that's why immediately he responds by sending a drone in that direction. The Overlord he sent to scout is going to take a little while longer, so this is actually pretty smart because he'll be able to get into the enemy's base much sooner, be able to see what he's opening up with, and on top of that, whenever he decides to pull his drone out, his Overlord's already going to be over there and is going to be able to scout the enemy's base. So there's some little micro stuff that Hero's doing here with his drone to be able to catch that probe, and he's trying to do as much damage as he can to it, but he's almost definitely not going to be able to catch it. So we'll see Hero open pretty standard with a 12 hatch 11 pool against Protoss. To any newer players to StarCraft or newer players to this matchup, it's pretty safe to do what Hero's doing because typically a Protoss will forge fast expand, which will effectively protect his natural base with cannons. This means getting Zerglings any sooner other than a 4 or 5 pool is going to be pretty ineffective because there are going to be cannons there to stop them. Now we're going to see Jaehoon pull something pretty interesting. He actually did not go Forge first, he actually went Gate first. It's pretty risky if the Zerg isn't doing some sort of cheese. Now that Jaehoon's revealed his Zealot, Hero now knows that he went Gateway first. And the reason for why he knows that he went Gateway first is because of how fast that Zealot came out. So he knows that if he's able to defend against this, he's going to be in pretty good shape. Hero takes a quick third expansion to have one more base than his opponent, and so that way he's ahead of him in economy. Now that our Zerg player's Zerglings have spawned, Jaehoon runs his Zealot around to the back of the mineral patches. As you can see here, it's pretty effective because it allows minimal surface area. That means instead of getting maybe 6 Zerglings surrounding the Zealot, you can only get up to 2. Hero was able to deal with the pressure that was going down on his main base, however Jaehoon continues to Zealot and send Zealots to his base. This provides Jaehoon with some pretty important scouting information, but not only that, but it allows him to continue to keep pressure on Hero. This allows Jaehoon to not only see how much minerals that Hero spent on Zerglings, but it also allows him to check the timings on some of his tech. This also works slightly against Jaehoon because this allows Hero to know how many Zealots that he's making and how many minerals he's spending on his Zealots. Since he spent so many minerals on Zealots, he doesn't have any cannons or a forge for that matter to be able to block the front. He's in the middle of making a forge, however it'll take a little bit longer for the cannons to come out. So Hero, seeing as well as expecting there to be Zealots patching up the last of the holes in his wall, he decides to pull his Zerglings back and deal with the pressure that's going on in his own base. So Jaehoon excellently micros his Zealot to get behind the mineral line just as he did with his first one, and this buys him a little bit more scouting time, however not much. The Zealot was really low health, so he was bound to die really soon anyways. Jaehoon gets some pretty valuable scouting information, knowing when that hatchery finished. He knows it just finished because there's only 2 larvae, and not only that, but the creep around the hatchery is still spreading. Jaehoon very smartly puts his 2 Zealots on the ramp, trying to keep them alive as long as possible. If Hero wants to be able to get a full surround on those Zealots, he's going to need to send some Zerglings all the way around to go up the other ramp on the other side and then attack them like that. Hero sees this and reacts almost immediately by doing exactly that. His minerals are getting pretty high and he's getting supply blocks, so he sends a drone to make a macro hatchery in his natural. He cleaned those two Zealots up pretty fast and pretty effectively without losing too many Zerglings. So that might have been fast for some of you, but what Hero just saw with his Scouting Overlord was the timing on his opponent's Stargate. The placement of his first Scouting Overlord was actually pretty important because it allowed him to keep it a lot longer while he was scouting the natural. Because he was just over the cliff, the cannon on the low ground was unable to see that Overlord. So Hero uses an evolution chamber instead of a Hydra Den to finish off the last of his Zerg wall. He also sent a singular Zergling to go deal with the scouting probe that's in his main base now. Now going back to the wall that Hero has at his natural, it's not nearly as important for him as it is for other races to have, but it'll make it a little bit easier for him to defend if he gets attacked. Also, the reason for why he chose to get an evolution chamber instead of a Hydra Den is that way he can make spore colonies to defend against early Corsairs. Corsairs are really fast moving Protoss air-to-air units. It's something that's really annoying for Zerg players to deal with very early on because you don't have anything to deal with anti-air. He does this instead of rushing for Hydralisks very early on because it's very expensive in gas. So keeping a sunken colony in his natural and keeping all his overlords pretty close to there early on is a pretty safe bet. The spore colony might not be able to move, however it has a much longer range compared to Hydralisks. Hero already knew that there was one Corsair and he just saw another one come out, so he knows that Jaehoon only has two to attack him with right now. Unluckily, that initial Scouting Overlord is about to get killed, so he's going to be supply blocked. Just as another quick little thing, Hero's kept Zerglings at the front of Jaehoon's base just to see when he pushes out or just to see what he has there. A little while ago, Hero started his lair. Now on top of that, he's also getting another macro hatch in his third base. He does this to spend some of the minerals that were already starting to pile up. So as we saw a couple seconds ago, Hero saw his Overlord finally die in his opponent's base. However, smartly, when he saw his Overlord getting attacked, he reacted almost immediately by making two Overlords to make up for that one. So when he keeps his Overlords in his natural, he wants to keep them slightly spread because Corsairs actually do area of attack damage. So as he pokes his Zealots into the front, he scouts that Jaehoon has 6 Zealots. Since he sees nothing else, this is pretty indicative of two things: Zealot speed and Templars. So now Hero has slowly started to reduce his drone production and start ramping up his Hydralisk production. The reason for why it's so important that he got those 3 bases early on is because it allows him to get so much more gas. He also sees that the Corsairs are at his third base, however they're an Overlord there, so it's pretty safe keeping his Hydralisks and Overlords where they are now. He doesn't do anything with the Hydralisks yet because he wants to keep them there to be able to defend the Overlords. Now that Jaehoon has 4, maybe 5 Corsairs, he pokes a C again if he can attack. However, it's also to just get a count on how many Hydras he has. There's a little bit of Zealot aggression in the front, but it's nothing too important because Hero has Zergling speed, so he can just get out of there really quickly. The main point right now is that he keeps an eye on where Jaehoon's army is right now. Now he starts to see Jaehoon start to move his army slightly towards the northeast part of the map. It's very vital that Hero starts to move his army up there because he'll be able to defend against any attacks on his third base. Not only that, but under the assumption that Templars started to come out, Dark Templars also will come out. That's the key reason for why Overlords are starting to be kept at the third base on top of the second base. Hero doesn't know exactly where Jaehoon's army is, but he's doing very effective scouting with those Zerglings by running them back and forth to tell when they get anywhere close. Now that he sees Zealots towards the upper ramp, he starts to position his army a little bit closer to his base. He also sees the Corsairs flying around, so he needs to make sure that he keeps the Hydras where they are. He quick target fires a single Corsair to reduce some of the pressure that he's getting from them. Now that was a really fast flash on screen, but what happened was some of his Zerglings started to get attacked by Dark Templar. The reason why this was a pretty good assumption was because previously there weren't any Overlords at the third expansion, and it's a pretty good way to get back into the game or to try to put yourself ahead as a Protoss player. So a very important part about Jaehoon's lair was that he was able to start upgrading pneumatic carapace. This allows Overlords to move much faster, meaning 1, he can get them away from Corsairs faster, and 2, he's able to defend against Dark Templar much more easily. Now it's very unlikely for Jaehoon to put any more money into Dark Templar because that would be a waste of money because they get killed very quickly. Now Dark Templar are very effective and they do a ton of damage, but the reason for why he doesn't use them to attack the front or anything like that is because 1, there are detectors there, meaning the Overlords, and even if the Overlords weren't there, there's still a spore colony there. Now even without the spore colonies, if he saw a shuttle coming in to drop into his main base, he can easily react because Hydras move very fast, or at least as long as they have the speed upgrade. So here spots that Jaehoon's army is slightly split. There are a couple of Zealots up towards the third base position. In the process of trying to pick off the lone zealots, he actually gets surrounded himself and loses a ton of hydras. Hero decides to move back his army and regroup. And now some pretty small standard stuff. Hero's getting pressured by some Corsairs, and he's just continuing to macro up and continue to make hydras. Hero's going to continue making hydras, and he's going to try to control the map the best he can with his mobility as well as massive amounts of hydras. Now, as he starts to move some of his hydras from his main base, he starts to get attacked by Jaehoon with a massive amount of zealots. Now, with no upgrades, it takes maybe 4 to 5 hits for a zealot to be able to kill a hydra. However, Psystorm's doing AoE damage and doing a ton of damage at the same time on top of being attacked by zealots makes them die pretty fast. However, some proper kiting and some really good micro allows Hero to pull out his army in the northern half pretty alright. So while he might not have nearly as many units between the zealots and his own base, he's able to at least get a surround and start to pick off some of the High Templar. A couple of Jaehoon zealots were able to sneak in and get up his ramp, however, some good micro and some good control will easily be able to deal with that. Since he's unable to defend immediately with his hydras, he uses his drones to attack back against the 2 zealots that are in his line. The reason for why he stacks them all in one spot is because it allows more drones to attack at one time. And so, since the small amount of hydras that he kept in his base were unable to defend properly, he sends his workers to mine at a different base temporarily. However, there are even more zealots coming into his base, so he has to bring back some of his hydras that he had out in the center part of the map back. To stall some of Jaehoon's zealots at his natural, as well as so that way they don't fall them back into the main base, he actually uses his drones to turn and attack the zealots. If Hero manages to keep Jaehoon's zealots in his natural, the hydras just don't need to go nearly as far to be able to deal with them. Not only that, but they don't need to go up a tiny little ramp to attack. Now, a single zealot managed to sneak into the main base, which isn't nearly that big of a deal, as it's really easy to deal with. However, he's getting attacked at his third base now. Now, because of the high amount of hydras that Hero had, that meant that if Jaehoon continued to attack with the zealots, those would pretty much go to waste and die almost immediately. Now, something I forgot to mention was that Hero actually took a 4th base. He'll temporarily resume drone production, however, only at the 4th base, in order to be able to get that saturated. Now, the reason for why he takes the natural instead of going into the main base of one of the quarter spawns that are adjacent to him is because it's a lot easier to take the 5th base whenever you want to. So anywhere that's not the 4th base, he'll continue to make hydras. Now, not wanting to poke into his enemy's front base, he's just moving his army around just to see where it might be. He's specifically checking around his 4th base to make sure that there's nothing there that might just try to counterattack. There's no more threat of Corsairs because of how many hydras he has, so he's free to spread his overlords around the map for scouting. So with one of his overlords, he actually spotted a couple of probes moving up to a 3rd base position. That obviously means there's a 3rd base. Hero's armor gets attacked by one of the DTs from before, however, it's not that big of a deal. It was probably there just for the sake of scouting. Jaehoon has a ton of zealots, so that means his army is pretty mineral heavy. Just a second ago, Jaehoon tried to get a surround on one of the hydras. However, to no avail, and they just managed to escape and now are getting free poke. So I feel bad for missing this a little while ago, but Hero actually put a Spire in his natural. Now Hero spots a ton of High Templar moving around at the front of Jaehoon's base. A couple of Hydralisks get caught out by Psystorms, but it's not that big of a deal. In fact, this is actually pretty good for him because that just means less storms later. So there are a couple of Zealots blocking the ramp, so he can't quite move up and attack his 3rd base yet. However, this won't stop him from macroing at all, so he continues to keep making Hydras. You'll see that Jaehoon actually starts to make some Archons because those Templar that he used to make it no longer have energy. Because he starts to see some Zealot movement, he starts to put some Sunkens at his natural. These sunken colonies on top of the wall that he has will make defending much easier. Since Hero's currently moving his army north, that means if he needs to move it back down, then he'll be able to defend much more easily. Which he actually did for the sake of not coming into direct contact with Jaehoon's army. However, we see another fight breaking out. We see a bunch of storms going down on Hero's Hydras. His micro and good splitting is definitely helping him a lot. However, there's only so much you can do with micro. Thankfully, Hero's macro is also godlike, so he has a ton of Hydras to be able to back this up. However, with so many Hydras being on low health, that means a couple of storms will actually kill him really fast. Just as with the last really big fight, his micro saves his upper half of his army. A couple of Hydras are able to get in from the back and start target firing some of the High Templar. Hero actually had a small group of idle Hydralisks kind of sitting on their ass at whatever his natural third would have been, so he pulls them in and starts to take advantage of using them. The Hydras up from the north are really low health after microing, so they go down pretty easily after a couple storms. However, because they're on low energy, Jaehoon pulls his High Templar back and sends in some Zealots to help clean up and to recover the retreat. Because he blew so many storms, Jaehoon is unable to actually defend his army now. He has a couple of storms to work with, however, that's not enough. Or at least it wouldn't have been if those Hydras weren't already really low health. So now that he's actually finally out of storms, Hero starts to send in Hydralisks to pick off the last of the High Templar. This was a really big hit for Jaehoon. While Jaehoon was able to kill most of Hero's army, Jaehoon only had High Templar left. The Zealots that were meant to slow down the Hydras didn't slow them down long enough. So because he let Hero's upper army live, and because he had no Zealots left to support him, he ended up losing those High Templar anyways. So we see a little bit of scouting with Jaehoon's army using the Zealots. It's not that big of a threat, and Hero's able to repel it easily. And now Hero decides he wants to take his 5th base. Now there's a really important thing about the spire that Hero made a little while ago. It's really important. You'll get to see it in action really soon. And by really soon, I mean really soon. As you can see already, Mutalisks are starting to get spawned. As you can probably guess, there's going to be some pretty intense Mutalisk stacking. And of course, Mutamicro. As you can probably guess already, he's going to be using those to pick off some High Templar. Very slow, very immobile, very weak. And since Mutalisks are so fast and do so much damage as a stack, they'll be able to take care of those guys really easily. He sees a shuttle to the south, but Jaehoon turns it around almost immediately, presumably because there's an overlord there and was able to see it. Jaehoon is just moving his army out of his base and just regrouping it. So just at the bottom of the screen coming up, he sees a ton of Dragoons. Now this is kind of good and kind of bad. This means Jaehoon's spending a ton more gas. Now spending gas on both Dragoons and High Templar, he's going to be running out really fast. And now we're seeing even more action. Moving those mutas around to be able to pick off those High Templar is really important. However, his Mutamicro is really great. His Hydra Micro falls back a little bit. He's losing quite a few of them to the side storms. And now Hero finally has Jaehoon pushed all the way back to his base. A little bit more Mutamicro just to pick off the last of the High Templar, as well as to pick off the shuttle. He's able to deal with the storms pretty easily, so it's not that big of a deal. Besides, even if he is getting stormed, he's able to make some more Hydras really easily. He has 5 bases now, after all. So Hero's army is taking some pretty big hits, but Jaehoon's army took much harder ones. He's lost a ton of gas now, no longer having any High Templar. So now we're seeing a little bit more micro-macro, nothing too important. However, we do notice that Hero starts to make Zerglings again. This is pretty important because this means he's planning to make some more Lurkers. Lurkers are AoE static defense, and they're really good against Zealots and Dragoons. Hero continues to bring Overlords with his army just in case there are any more Dark Templar. Also, since he's presumably in Lurker soon, it's also to pick off any Observers. Also, after all that action and all that micro, Hero finally remembers about his 5th base and starts to saturate it. Hero moves his army around the top half of the map just for the sake of scouting, as well as to be able to get a surround much more easily. Even more Zerglings start to come out, and presumably the hive was for the sake of getting Adrenal Glands, which is attack speed for Zerglings. And now, even more standard macro stuff. When he checked back on his 5th base a little while ago, he made a macro hatch. So now he just has a ton of hatcheries and a ton of larvae to be able to spend. Hero plans to position his army much closer to Jaehoon's base, however he spots a couple of scouting zealots, and obviously he decides he wants to go kill it. Since both Jaehoon and Hero lost their entire armies in the last fight, they're pretty much just sitting back and macroing right now. So the army we saw at the top half of the map is starting to move down. The positioning of this part of the army is really important because it means he can get a concave much more easily. And a concave of his army against his enemy's army obviously means he's going to get more units attacking. And as many units as he can attacking. And some Scourge come out, which might be an accident when trying to make some drones. Also, Deviler Mount goes down, which means there's almost definitely going to be Lurkers now. Some Nidus Canals go down so that way any unit spawned from the 4th and 5th base can come down much more easily. He makes even more Scourge, so it probably means it's not an accident. Presumably they're either for shuttle or for observers. So another thing that's come up really important throughout this game, as well as throughout this matchup, is air control. So Hero's able to scout very freely with those overlords. Jaehoon hasn't had anything to deal with air in a very long time. Also, right now, Corsairs are very unsafe because of how many Hydras that Hero has. So because of that, Hero can see almost all of the map. A little bit of scouting, poke, and aggression by Jaehoon with using his Dragoons. One Dragoon gets picked off, but it's not that big of a deal. However, this is very good for Hero because obviously any little bit helps. Right there we see Hero start to spawn some Lurkers. More Zerglings start to spawn, and more aggression by Jaehoon. Some Hydras are going to get picked off, but it's not that big of a deal. And we see Jaehoon put down another evolution chamber. At this point he has 1 in his natural and 2 in his main base, and that means triple upgrades. Because he's at such high supply and has nothing to spend it on, this is pretty good. These upgrades will just give him an even bigger advantage. So we see even more positioning out of Hero's army. Jaehoon gets even more aggressive and starts to poke out of his base, so we can only assume that his 3rd base is starting to get mined out. And now Lurkers finally start to come out. Spread them out so that way they don't get absolutely destroyed by storms. Also to make sure they're as effective as they can be in this upcoming fight, Hero immediately burrows his Lurkers, and 2 Lurkers die from storms. It's a little upsetting, but he has a ton more. And all I have to say now is sit back, watch, and enjoy the rest of this game. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making this video. This is kind of my way of sharing how much I love Starcraft with everybody. Anyways, peace.
수고하셨습니다.